All right, so we're ready. One of the most hotly anticipated spaces I think I've had with the great Imperator returning to us from Australia. Man, it's been a couple months at least, maybe three since we've done a space. I'm happy that we're able to come together with a fascinating topic. How are you?
I'm very good. How are you? I know we've jumped into a few spaces here and there, like some ad hoc ones, but honestly, these spaces are my favorite part of all X. So I'm so happy to do this.
Doing good. We're in a new year and we're just rocking and rolling. I want to encourage everybody to follow Imperator if you're not already doing so, and you can subscribe to him to support his work. And we're basing this space off a mega thread he did. I think it was your biggest thread ever back about a month ago. Got over 800,000 views. It'll probably eventually reach a million, and as time goes on. But it's basically about the origins of evil. First, before we sort of get into it, Imperator, what made you want to tackle this topic?
It was actually like most of my threads, it was actually in response to a conversation that I had with someone, and we did a bit of a back and forth. And he was asking me questions, and I was responding. And then I'm like, oh, this is actually pretty good information. And just based on the comments that I saw from the people who were following, because it was a pretty big account that I was having this conversation with, they're like, where are you getting this information from? This is incredible. I've never heard this before. And I thought to myself, you know what, might as well just put all this together and just put it in a single thread. So the only thing that I had to kind of do was put the images on there. All the information was already there. So um, I think this is probably one of my best threads only because it was a very organic thread. It's not like I sat there and I said, I'm going to make a thread about the Roman Legion, which I've done, and it did pretty well. But like, it kind of isn't. This is going to sound strange. It's not authentic because I sat there and I said, I'm going to write about this. Whereas this thread in particular was based on genuine conversations that I've just kind of like compiled together. It took like a little bit of editing, but I pretty much did all the work already in the actual conversation that I had with the individual. So I don't know. I feel like it was good because most people, unless you like listen to Father Ripperger or something, or read Father Gabriel Mort's books, like no one knows this stuff.
And they have a lot of misconceptions. Just like people have a misconception, I think that when we go to heaven, we might become angels, right? Which are totally different beings. So let's ask the big question: what is the origin of evil?
Well, to put it very simply, God is truth, goodness, and beauty, and many of the other attributes that we associate with Him, like God is one, God is life, God is love. Deus caritas est. Um, so whatever is evil is not an entity in and of itself. It's actually the absence of those things that God is. So when we think of, if God is love, then evil is the absence of love. And if God is light, evil is the absence of light. And if God is goodness, evil is the absence of goodness. The origins of evil come from God making individuals, whether angelic or human, with free will, and individuals choosing through their free will to either um, not cooperate with God's, plan, God's commandments, choosing their own desires above that which is right, and that is essentially the origin of evil. It's just choosing to avoid or do that which is
Sort of like the color black, right? It's not a color so much as it's the absence of light, the absence of visible light.
absolutely even things like like coldness is a thing. Coldness is just the absence of heat. So that's why when people say, if God is good, why do bad things happen? That's typical, like, when you're on, I know you must get this a lot because your account's been exploding lately. It's so awesome. Like there's Rosary for Newbies. That has been awesome. I think it was like 11:30 at night last night before I went to bed, and I just clicked on your page and I saw like how many people are jumping onto it. And you would get more of those questions than I would because you attract more um like non-Catholics and new people and people who are new to Christianity and Catholicism. And you would get so many questions like, oh, if God is good, why do people die? Why do people get cancer? And why do bad things happen? And then, it's kind of like it's a very I don't want to say ignorant, but it's a very misinformed understanding that God actively just punishes people all the time and is actively sort of like divinely intervening in every single person's life individually at every single moment and like chastising them. It's just a very strange concept. But again, like most people have no idea how this works or how this um I guess, how the divine economy operates. So they just, most people are genuinely curious. They've just never heard this before. But a lot of people are, there are that small percentage of people that are just malicious, that just want to fight online. So, yeah, you must get more of these questions than I do.
Yeah, it's that question. I think it was the C.S. Lewis book, right? The Problem with Pain. This is one of the hardest things, like, for people to believe. Why does a good God let bad things happen? It's hard for people to think about because people think, well, if I could stop something bad, I would. But there's a gift that God gave to all people, including angels who fell, called free will. And he can't give that and then intervene in every particular situation, although he can intervene whenever he wants to. Talk a little bit about free will and how that plays into this.
Yeah, so this is a misconception again that people have. There's a distinction between God's active and passive will. What that means is God is the creator and the prime mover and the first cause of all things on this earth. So I'll give you an example. I'll use a practical example. I once had a kid in that I was speaking to, and might have been a school student or something like that. And he was saying to me, and he was being very earnest, and so was I. And like he brought up the question, I said, let's speak about it on site because I didn't want to kind of bring something up that's kind of personal to him in public. But he basically said, whenever we're talking about religion, he'd get very, very defensive and very hostile. And I said to him, I go, listen, man, like, well, what's up? Like, what's your problem? And he goes, we went around a little bit. We're talking about a few things. He goes, oh, you believe X, Y, and Z. And then he eventually said, oh, if God is good, why did my grandmother die? And I recently discovered, like during that conversation, that she only recently passed away, like maybe 2 or 3 weeks ago. And I said, okay, let's have this conversation. We have like this honest conversation. He goes, yeah. I go, how old was your grandmother? I think he said like 94 or 95 or something. And I said, number one, your God didn't kill your grandmother. I know that sounds very strange to say. And I go, when God is I guess you could say the first mover or the first cause, God created the universe. And in doing that, he created the natural order of things. He created, gravity, and he created thermodynamics, and he created all of these, things that we consider as part of the natural world. Our bodies die and decay as a process of just being alive and being human beings and being subject to the material universe. So that's not God actively willing that your grandmother pass away. That's just a consequence of nature that God passively allows to happen. So it's kind of like, if I use the analogy, if I have a child where you see like a parent would say to their child, for example, I don't have a fireplace, but you say to a child, they have a young child, and they walk up to a fireplace, and the parent will say, don't go near the fireplace. And the child's about, 3 or 4 years old, so they don't really have their full functioning reason, I guess you could say. When the kid walks up, they give you a cheeky look, and they look back, and they walk over to the fireplace, put their hand out, you say, don't touch the fireplace, you're going to hurt yourself. And then they do it 2 or 3 times. And then on the 4th time, you say, you know what? Do it. Let the child put their hand near the fireplace. And it's going to hurt a little bit, but you let them do it anyway. And that child puts their hands, they, lift it back, tears start rolling out of their eyes, and they run back to you saying, Mommy, Daddy, my hand hurts. And, give them little kisses on their hand, and you say, it's okay, baby. Like, I hope you're okay. That's why we don't touch fire. That's kind of like how, I know it's a very simplistic analogy, but that's kind of how God operates with free will. The active will is when God actively wills something to happen. So, for example, creating your soul, creating the universe, dying on the cross, things like miracles. These are when God actively intervenes in history, in time, in space, and makes something happen because he wants it to happen. Passive will is when God permits something to happen, whether good or bad, for the greater glory of God and as according to his divine providence. So we don't always understand that. Okay, so we don't always, that little child who burns their hand in the fireplace, they might think to themselves, then let's pretend they're rational for a second. Why did my father or mother allow me to burn my hand? My father or mother is like a vicious person who just wants to watch me suffer. You can take that opinion, because why would they let me do that? But the other side of the coin is, from the parent's point of view, that the child probably doesn't understand, is that I would rather they suffer this small affliction or this small suffering in order to understand the grand lesson that fire is dangerous and that you should trust your parents and listen to their instructions because they have what's better for you. So that's kind of like how, I guess, on a cosmic scale or on a supernatural scale, we operate. Like, we might realize, like, why did God let this happen to me? Why did bad things happen to me? But you don't realize the grand scheme in divine providence, in soteriology, like why did certain things happen? You don't see the ripple effect. It's like the butterfly effect. You don't realize that small things have gigantic repercussions throughout history. So most people don't recognize that, or they don't want to talk about that, or because they're, you know, because of as a consequence of uh, habituating lives of sin and vice, they're unable to see the truth of things. I know that was a very long-winded answer, but I hope I say.
Absolutely. Before we sort of talk about the first rebel, Lucifer, I want to read something from Isaiah. How you are fallen from heaven, O Lucifer, son of the morning, how you are cut down to the ground, you who weaken the nations. For you have said in your heart, I will ascend into heaven, I will exalt my throne above the stars of God. I will also sit on the mount of the congregation, on the farthest sides of the north. I will ascend above the heights of the clouds. I will be like the Most High. So, when does this happen? This happens, of course, I'm asking, but I think I know the answer. This fall of Lucifer happens before human beings are created, right?
Yeah, so it's kind of explained as the instances of creation. So it's not like there's a time frame, because in order for something to exist in time, it must exist in materially. So that's why God is outside of time and space, because he's immaterial, if that makes sense. I know that's a bit probably confusing to people who aren't theologically or philosophically trained, but in order for something to be subject to time, it needs to be physical. So angels aren't physical; they're purely spiritual. So they're not subject to the same rules of time that we are. That's why they can, have different powers and different abilities. Anyway, in one of the let's just be general here. In the first instance of creation, God creates the light, and then he separates it from the darkness. That's what we read in the sacred scripture. People always look at that and they go, "Oh, see, your Bible's wrong because there's two creation stories. He creates the light and the darkness, and then a couple of days later, he creates the sun and the moon and things like that." The reference to the light and the darkness refers to the angels, and it's the separation between the good angels and the bad angels, or those who rebel. So in one of the instant or in the first instance of creation, God creates the angels, and they all have different ranks, they all have different orders, they all even have different they're different species, as the Thomas put it. And again, if you listen to someone like Father Chad Ripperger, he explains this really well. They're all different in kind, in the same way that a lion is different from a bear. That's how different the angels are according to their nature, I guess you could say. And there are different ranks of angels, like choirs of angels. So there's normal angels, there's guardian angels, which are normal angels, archangels, dominions, powers, thrones, cherubim, seraphim, probably leaving some out, and principalities and things like that. They all have different functions within like the heavenly hierarchy. The highest ones are the seraphim. So the seraphim are the most powerful. They're the ones that sit around the throne of God and adore him. And what ends up happening is there's one particular angel where God basically the second instance of creation is what people tend to like, what theologians tend to theorize, speculate. No one can definitively say this is exactly what happened, because how could we know? It comes through like divine revelation, through sacred scripture, early church fathers, things like that. There's this understanding that we aren't exactly sure how, but there was an instance where God gives the angels a choice to follow him or not. And that was due to the fact that a lot of these theologians speculate that um, God revealed salvation history to the angels. And he revealed it to them in different ways and in different measures according to their nature. And some of the angels rejected that. So, for example, Lucifer, who was the leader who was one of the highest seraphim, and Lucifer is obviously the angel that we equate with Satan, who is Satan actually. Um, he rejected in his pride. His vice was pride. He refused to submit, firstly, to God because of his own power and magnificence. But theologians speculate that it's also because he would refuse to, or he refused to submit to an incarnate God and the idea of a Theotokos, like the mother of God. He refused to submit to that because he was so powerful and so strong. He said, I will not disrespect myself. I'm just going blank with the word, and worship or give honor and praise to a lesser being than myself. Non-serviam, I will not serve. And that's when the battle kicks off, because through his free will, he rejects God, and that kind of like inspires this kind of like rebellion, or acts as a symbol for the rebellion of all the angels who rejected God under different sort of aspects. So some rejected God's mercy, some rejected the idea that, you know, uh, just the incarnation itself, things like that. So that's why, as we go down the line, and I'm pretty sure this conversation will get to, is that's why particular demons are associated with particular vices, because that's usually the under the title to which they rejected God in his divine um divine providence, I guess you could say.
Yeah, we're talking about the origin of evil with Imperator. If you'd like to ask a question later, you can go ahead and request the mic, so we'll have that done. Also, I'll ask you, if you haven't, please repost the space so more people can learn this fascinating story about the origin of evil. So in your thread, you talked about, of course, you're saying there that the angels had different ranks in heaven, and when they fall and become demons, they still retain their, you say, ranks, natures, and powers. Explain that a little more.
Yeah, so just by nature of how they were created, a seraphim, which is the highest angel, is almost inestimably more powerful than a a guardian angel, for example. So when they fall, they're still angels. We just call them demons, or we call them devils. But they retain those powers, but they use them for I guess you could say for evil. So um, someone like Lucifer, who's one of the most powerful angels, he then becomes the most powerful demon. And demon is just a Greek word meaning daimonis, which just means spirit. So um, demons are technically angels. They're just fallen angels. So they're not like God created angels, then God created demons, and like they're fighting each other, they're equals. No, God created just angels, and then what we call demons are just the fallen angels who take on like a fallen sort of nature, and that's why we call them demons. So that's why all throughout the Old Testament, throughout salvation history, you'll see that there's certain sort of like recurring demons, I guess you could say, because they tend to be the more powerful ones that tend to lead the lesser demons in certain activities. So you'll see things like with that throughout history, um, there's like a demon called Beelzebub or Balhadad or something. Like they're usually like associated with particular gods, with pagan gods throughout history. They tend to recur because they're like the more powerful ones. And I think even when I read Dante's Inferno, he kind of goes into this a little bit. Like he kind of gives you like a snapshot of like I guess the damned landscape. And there still is a hierarchy within hell, and then they're more powerful and, you know, I guess you could say weaker demons. But even the ones that are, I guess you could say, at the bottom of the demonic hierarchy are still unbelievably more powerful and capable than even, you know, the smartest human beings. So that's why it's very dangerous to get involved with um, the occult and things like that, because you're dealing with powers that you can't possibly contend with unless you have supernatural protection from God, from the sacraments and things like that. And people don't realize that, and they get involved in the occult, things like that. And it's very, very destructive and devastating to their spiritual, mental, and physical well-being.
In your thread, you talk about demons want to corrupt and destroy mankind because they're made in God's image. They're really sort of reminds you like of a jealous lover. Like they Lucifer did not want to have humans in this story be between him and God, and it's like they're doing this to hurt God. Is that how you would sort of describe it in a very simple way?
That's why I tend to subscribe to the belief that Lucifer fell because of the incarnation, because there seems to be a particular hatred of Mary and, you know, obviously Jesus Christ and his incarnation with Lucifer particularly. And again, that's why I kind of subscribe to that view, even though it's not like dogmatic, you must believe that in order to be a Catholic or anything. Because we're made in God's image and likeness, and it's almost like the demons hate us because we, even though we fall as they did, we can be redeemed and they can't. And it's kind of like you know, the saying "misery loves company." It's a bit of that. It's the fact that well, if we're down here, we're going to take you with us. And because um, I know this is gonna be a very very weird analogy, and I mean no disrespect, but like when you watch like I remember watching The Great Gatsby, and or even reading The Great Gatsby, and when Gatsby kind of sees Daisy and Pat Buchanan's daughter, and he sees that the daughter kind of resembles the father, and it's kind of like he doesn't hate the child, but it kind of like it sours the relationship, even though he has this fantastical relationship in his mind that he wants with Daisy. He kind of ruins it because he's like, this person is a living embodiment of what I lost, and I can't get over that. I know it's probably like a weird analogy, but it's kind of like that's what human beings are to I guess the demons. We represent something that they can never have, and something that they lost, and because of that, they want to destroy us. And because they basically declared war on God, and because their nature, their decisions are eternal because of their nature and how they sin, they will wage unceasing war against human beings who are made in God's image and likeness as a way to kind of like attack God. Because they can't attack God directly, they can't harm him directly. Well, what's the next best thing? I'm just going to destroy all your stuff. I'm going to ruin your people. I'm going to destroy them to hurt you. And I think that's kind of what I guess human history is all about, is that contest, that
You sort of alluded to this earlier, but are there like demons associated with certain vices, for example, murder or lust or I don't know, even profanity or something like that?
Yeah, so there's one like only off the top of my head. There's like a demon called Asmodeus, and that's a demon that is associated with lust and like I guess you could say like fornication. And there's actually I think it was Our Lady of La Salette or Good Success or something. She talks about how even in she was talking about the modern age, and she was saying that seminaries have become dens of Asmodeus, and talking about how like the sins of the flesh have kind of taken over parts of the world. And she basically says that this is like the reign of Asmodeus at this time. So if a person is possessed, for example, by a particular demon that has a particular vice, you have to attack them against that vice. Like you have to find out their nature, and then unravel them through their vice by appealing to the opposite virtue. So like if it's an angel of uh, like for example like Osmodeus wanted to do with lust, the exorcist, to my knowledge, will have to go in and kind of like do prayers of deliverance that also associate with like invoking God's love and chastity and perfection and purity, and that kind of like draws it out, because it's contrary to its nature. So that's kind of that's the way I understand it. Again, I might be wrong on that. That's one thing that it's always a bit tricky because there's no definitive literature on that. But yeah, that's the way I understand.
Well, throughout history, human beings have committed many acts of evil. Millions of people have been murdered. Do you think people themselves can actually be evil, or are they just cooperating, evil doers because they're under the influence of an evil being like a demon?
Yeah, so human beings are not evil. That's because God made us in His image and likeness, and we're intrinsically good. But people choose through their free will. They choose to do that which is evil, because they choose things that are contrary, firstly, to the natural law, to their nature, and things that are contrary to divine law and supernatural law. And in doing those things, their action is considered evil. So, um, and then there's things like natural evils, like things like death and decay and natural disasters and things. Those aren't evil in themselves; they're just part of nature. So, um, okay, here's one's a bit of a touchy subject. Um, like if you look at something like a volcano or even like a wildfire or hurricanes. Like I know you're American, and you get like a lot of hurricanes in the south because they come through up I think it's like the Gulf of Mexico, and they go through Florida, or the Gulf of America I should say, and they go through Florida and they cut through like those southern states. You might say, God, why would you do this to us? This is why are you ruining people's lives and people's homes? That's not God that did that. Okay, God created the universe. God created this planet. God created this ecosystem, and human beings decided to live in the south where there are marshlands. And anyone who knows anything about you know the ecosystem is marshlands tend to absorb hurricanes. So by the time they actually hit inland, they kind of basically die out. But because human beings want to build nice beachfront properties, they, drain the marshlands, and they make beautiful areas for, um, you know, cities and things like that. And of course, a hurricane's going to go through there and smash towns. I'm not saying like, I'm not taunting anyone, but that's just how the world is structured. If you're going to live near a volcano, you're going to get hit by lava sometimes. There's going to be earthquakes. So people tend to conflate that as like God hates us and God just wants to kill people. No, 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 no. Those are things that are part of the natural order of civilization and the natural part of the ecosystem. And we just choose to sometimes not take that um, not take that into account when we do things. So doing things like, you know, I'm gonna gamble and do drugs, and I'm gonna waste all my money. And then when I hit rock bottom, I say, God, why have you done this to me? People tend to say, oh, God ruined my life. God ruined my marriage. My wife left me and I'm homeless. It's like, no, no, no. God didn't do that to you. You did that. You chose to start gambling. You start to choose to have drugs. Obviously now it's an addiction. You can't control it, but you can't see, or people fail to realize that all the things that happen to them are due to um all of these actions that lead to this one point, again, like that butterfly effect. But people don't like to recognize that. They just, and again, this is something that you would know and that everyone in this room would know. People would prefer to just blame their problems on other people because you don't want to have accountability, and you don't want to say like, I made a mistake, I did the wrong thing. For example, I ruined my marriage, I have a problem, I have an addiction, I need to fix it. They'll rather say, God ruined this, God did this, I hate God, religion is stupid. You know what I mean? Like that's a very immature way to look at things. And it's kind of like, that's again, even pagans like the Stoics even recognize that things that happen in the world that tend to be evil most of the time are just due to our own failures and due to our own incompetence, and we bring it on ourselves.
According to Thomas Aquinas, everybody has a guardian angel. Do you think everybody has a specific demon that's working to corrupt their soul? Or is it just
That's
more
the
like specific vices, like, they'll encounter? What do you think?
Yeah, that's a good question. Some people speculate that, again, this again is speculation. I don't know this for a fact. This again, there's no like definitive literature on this, but a lot of exorcists will talk about this. Is each each angel that fell, each fallen angel had a throne in heaven, and like for example, you Catholic Frequency, you are through divine providence, you are the kind of like, I don't want to say predestined, but like God desires you to have a particular seat in heaven. Whether you reach that or not is completely up to you. So the demons also recognize this. So they kind of like attach themselves to you because they don't want you to take their spot that they fill, and basically left vacant. So that's one theory. I don't know what to think about that. That's a bit speculative, but basically in the same way that you're given a guardian angel, the idea is that if Satan's plan is to destroy you, it then ascribes a particular demon to a person to break them. So your guardian angel is basically like a spiritual bodyguard, and they protect you. And the holier you are, the more sanctifying grace you have, the more virtue you have, the more you are protected, and the more power your guardian angel has to defend you and to protect you. And they also give an account of your life on the day of judgment. And the more we live according to vice and evil and sin, the weaker they are and the more they distance themselves from you. They're always with you, but they kind of like leave you to your own devices because you've chosen habitually to reject God and do that which is evil. And they're like, you know what, man, fine, do it. If that's what you want to do, go for it. That little and so when you okay, so from a Catholic point of view, you know how we have like patron saints of things. So like we have, police officers that, or people in the military would say, I have a particular devotion to Saint Michael because he's the patron saint of spiritual combat and just warriors and things like that. The same thing is true within demons. So there are certain demons, as I mentioned before, like Asmodeus, who are I guess you could say specialize, or like the patron demons of particular vices. And you'll usually find that individuals or families, and this is where it gets a bit crazy, even nations and communities can be afflicted or under the dominion of a particular demon. So um, people tend to say like that whole age of Aquarius, the 60s and the sexual revolution, that was the triumph of Asmodeus within the Western society, and we're still dealing with that the repercussions of that, because that's when vice and licentiousness just became absolutely rampant. And he's the demon that's usually associated with that. So it's this idea that in the same way that a country can be dedicated to a particular saint, like you think of Spain and you think of Santiago Matamoros or something like that, or you think of Lebanon and you think of Saint Charbel or Mar Charbel, or Saint Nantala, Saint Rafka. You associate particular saints with particular regions and they protect them. The same thing is true for demons. They can do that as well. So you can have particular families that are kind of like under the sway of a particular demon. And priests and exorcists will tell you that if a father has a particular vice, it's actually because of the order of nature. If a father sins, he kind of like welcomes that vice into his house because he has spiritual authority over that dominion in that house. So if a father becomes, priests will talk about this if you listen to like the lectures again, and what's the word, exorcist, they'll say things, and again, they're not breaking the seal of confession, they're just talking generally, that if you have like a father who's like in his 40s and then just suddenly gets addicted to pornography, they will tell you that within a couple of weeks, if that's habitual, that the sons and even the daughters start confessing the same things, because it's almost like that demon has been welcomed into their home and starts afflicting everyone. That's why as a man, it's very important that you're virtuous and that you do the right thing, particularly within your house, because that's your domain and you have to keep that holy and keep that safe. Because if you fall, you're basically saying within the divine economy and the hierarchy of grace and within like the order of nature, I, as a spiritual head of this family, I am welcoming you into my house. And then all the demons go, mad, we're in, go. And they just rush in, and they run rampant within your family. So that's why things like exorcisms, things like, blessing houses and blessing cars and blessing buildings and nations and consecrations and things. This is why these are so important, because you're breaking that dominion that particular spirits might have over individuals and families. And it's getting pretty deep now, and I apologize to anyone who's new here saying, what is this guy talking about?
No, it's absolutely fascinating. Repost if you haven't reposted this space yet. We know that God is omnipresent and omniscient. He knows all of us by name. I know this is going to be speculation, but do you think the devil, Lucifer, now Satan, knows each human being by name?
I think it's fair to say that every single demon has complete knowledge of everything that is on earth, because they're not subject, like I said, to time and space, and they can see and interact with everything that exists in the material universe almost instantly, because they're not bound by like the laws of physics. So yes, I would say they absolutely do. Everything that exists within the created universe, they understand completely.
I want to leave time for questions. I don't want to get through the rest of your thread here. Talk about, because of sin, people began to worship their ancestors. What was that about?
Well, we're going to make the neo-pagans mad now. Are you ready, Catholic Frequency?
I'm ready.
Oh, gosh. All right. So the origins of paganism, again, the Bible says that the God of the Gentiles are demons, but the Lord thy God made heaven and the earth. And that's exactly what it is. Okay. People get upset with that. They say, no, but like, X what? No, I don't care. My ancestors are Roman. They grew up in an Illyrian, and they were worshipping birds 2,000 years ago. And you know what? They were wrong. Okay. It's not like this is some Eurocentric or Christocentric view of history. It is what it is. Okay. Some people were just, I guess you could say, civilized sooner than others. Or like brought the truth sooner than others, I should say. What ends up happening is, like St. Paul talks about this, and if you just read just general histories, you'll see this, that there's basically like two ways that paganism kind of emerges, but the most predominant way it emerges is, if you look at ancient history, let's like look at the Greeks, for example. What ends up happening is there's this cult of, well, not really a cult, there's a desire to worship one's, or to reverence one's ancestors. And there's nothing wrong with that. Like, we all should honor our ancestors by our actions, and even, we have pictures of our ancestors, like our grandparents and things like that. Well, we should honor our ancestors. I'm not saying we shouldn't. That's a very, very good and righteous thing, and it's in accordance with the virtue of justice and piety. But what ends up happening is, if someone had a great ancestor who was like a priest or a hero or a champion or a general or a warlord or a chieftain, you might say, you know what, this person's very important. Let's make a statue of this person. As an American, you might say, oh, cool, George Washington was very important, or Thomas Jefferson. Let's make a statue of this person and put it like in our city because he did great things for our country or whatever country you come from. And what ends up happening is people start, as time progresses and they fall further and further away from the truth, they start to attribute supernatural powers to certain statues and certain icons and certain images and certain, um, supernatural phenomenon. And in doing that, they start to idolize the statue or the icon or the image or that part of nature. And then as time progresses, it just evolves more and more. And people start saying, no, 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 not only, and I'm just using it as an example, not only was George Washington the founder of America who fought these battles, he actually was like God in the flesh. And that's why he won, because he actually had supernatural power, because he is a God. He is a demigod. You don't realize this. This is what happens. And then Satan says, bang, got you. So what he does is, and this is what you usually find throughout history, like with the gods of Moloch and Bal-Hadad within the Middle East and things like that in the Old Testament, is demons will actually possess those statues or those natural phenomena or those artifacts to then reinforce that pagan belief that this, for example, George Washington actually is a god. So, supernatural things will actually occur when they're in the presence of this statue. So then now, in this hypothetical situation, George Washington is now a god. And that's how paganism kind of develops. And I'm being very simplistic here, but I'm not going to go on like a 2-hour tangent about, individual gods from different cultures, but that's kind of how it works. And that's why within all religious traditions, especially the monotheistic religions, there's even in the Old Testament, there's a prohibition against making idols or making statues, because people were so, within the ancient world, were so predisposed to making statues and worshiping them that in the Mosaic law, it's just said no one's allowed to make statues ever, because Moses and, through divine inspiration, knew that it would lead to people worshiping them. And then you saw that when Moses goes up in Mount Sinai and starts, getting the commandments from God, he comes down and Aaron and the Israelites have already made a golden calf and start worshiping the Egyptian Apis bull again. So human beings have a natural tendency to want to worship and to want to show veneration. So that's why paganism is so prevalent, is because people will start, and you might know this from your own personal life. You know people that just like exaggerate and they sensationalize stories. And as time progresses, and I've even seen this, and I'm pretty sure every single person in this space has seen this happening, where you'll hear your friend retell a story 3 or 4 times, and on the 4th time, you're like, bro, you just made up half of that story now. Those 3 things that you just said weren't even in the original, and I was there, and that did not happen. But you just kind of leave them and let them do it. So that's kind of like how paganism develops. And obviously, paganism exists on a spectrum. And I know this is going to sound strange, but you might say like the paganism of like the Greco-Romans is more virtuous than like the paganism of the Aztecs. Okay, I personally would say that, objectively speaking, the paganism of the Greeks or the Romans is objectively less evil and destructive as the paganism of the Druids in Britain. Just because you look at the practices, and they're more like depraved, and they're not as conducive to human flourishing. You know what I mean? So it exists on a spectrum. So I don't know. Again, I hope that answers your question. It's really complicated, and that in itself can be its own space that goes for like 3 hours. And that's kind of like the origins of paganism. And thanks be to God, the apostle Jesus Christ and the apostles have brought the truth to us, and that is why, because people saw the reason of it, and fides and ratio, they saw the faith and reason, the perfect congruity between the two. That's why my ancestors and all of pretty much most people in this space, our ancestors were converted by the apostles or people who knew the apostles, because everyone said, no, these pagan gods, they're not legitimate. As Greek wisdom starts to spread throughout the Hellenistic world, everyone starts saying, no, Jupiter is not real. Ares and Mars and all these stories, and Hephaestus, these are stupid stories. Like, we don't believe this anymore. If God is good, why is, excuse my language, Zeus sounds like a rapist. And if you actually read ancient history, Zeus is a rapist. Okay, so like, why are we worshiping this guy and talking about truth and justice and honor, and our own gods don't even subscribe to these same beliefs? So that's why they start rejecting these beliefs, and that's why when the apostles come and they use faith and reason, and then they back it up with supernatural, miracles and things, everyone's like, no, you guys, the logos that you speak about, that's the true God, and they all convert.
What would you say about the dangers if somebody said, boy, this is an interesting space, but after I leave here, I have an appointment, I'm going to go to a psychic, because I want to see how the year is going to work out. Why is that dangerous?
Because, okay, so two things. Number one, I would say that like 90% of psychics and tarot card readers and people like that are just completely, they're just scamming you. They're all a scam, but like they don't actually know what they're doing. They're just making things up. They're just saying like, oh, Catholic frequency, you will meet a very important person this week. Like that's so vague. That could mean absolutely anything. You know what I mean? It's kind of like horoscopes. You say something that's vague enough that it can apply to anything. Therefore, you might go see your friend that you haven't seen in like 3 weeks and like, oh my gosh, the psychic was right. That's exactly what she said. She said I was going to meet someone important. Or you project your own interpretation onto their words. And a good psychic will know how to use what's called like NLP and know how to like pick up on your body signs and your tics and your movements, and they'll be like, oh, this person obviously seems agitated, something's going wrong, and they'll ask you, oh, something going wrong? You're like, yes, oh my gosh, how did you know? Like they know how to like manipulate you. Then there's actually like I would say like 5 to 10% of psychics that actually have supernatural abilities because they basically have given themselves over to the demonic and they actually have access to supernatural knowledge, a small degree of supernatural power. They actually can communicate with spirits. And that's why they can actually give you occult knowledge. Because, like I said before, every single demon has complete knowledge of the material universe and everything that exists. So let's say Catholic frequency right now, or anyone in this room, I'm just going to pick Adam Apple, okay? Because I like your name and your picture jumped out to me, okay? I know, like this demon knows for a fact that Adam Apple and Catholic frequency have called each other on the phone and they're going to come to my house. All right. That's just a fact. I don't know that because I'm all the way in Australia. I have no way of knowing that. And I haven't spoken to you about that. But what the demon will do is it will tell the tarot card reader or like the psychic, this is what's going to happen. Adam Apple and Catholic frequency are going to call you and they're going to tell you they're going to come to your house. And then I'm going to say, oh my gosh, that's exactly what happened. 1 week later, Adam Apple and Catholic frequency came to my house. How did you know that? And the person will be like, oh, because, I'm a psychic. I know these things. It's like a very simple trick. And we call that within like technical terms, it's like clairvoyance. That like they look into the future, but what they're actually doing is the demons are giving them information about the material, like the created universe that they have access to, if that makes sense.
Absolutely. You touched on this earlier when you were talking about the statues and stuff. Can demons work signs and wonders?
Yes, they can, because of their nature, they have the ability to manipulate the material universe to an extent that God allows. And the most important one is when a person, let's say like I'm sitting in my room right now and I'm looking at this door, okay? Again, my perception of this door is based on like my eyes and my brain is, understanding what I'm looking at and, the whole science behind that. What demons have the ability to do, and angels do this too, is they have the ability to manipulate my perception of reality because they can access your imagination. This is why it's very important to look or see things that are very destructive to your soul, because that can always be used against you psychologically. I know that's a bit tricky and a bit scary to think about, but this is why it's very important not to see things that are, like pornography and things like that, because those images will always exist within your subconscious and within your the material part of your intellect, which is your imagination. And these images can be drawn up into your imagination by them, and that's what we call things like temptation. So what they can do is, if you're looking at something like a door, they can manipulate your perception of the door so that it looks like, for example, the door's on fire, even though it's not, because they have the ability to manipulate again your perception of the created universe by, I guess you could say, interfering with the material part of your imagination. I know it probably sounds a bit confusing, but that's essentially how it works. So they're manipulating the way you perceive things around you. So that's one way. Another way is sometimes, as part of salvation history, God just says, you know what? This person's X, Y, and Z needs to happen. You have more dominion and more power in this regard. And that's why, like, when we see the story of Job and things like that, or like the vision of Pope Leo the 13th at Mass, where he says, you have more time, you have more power, go for it. And God passively permits a demon or the demons to have more power over a particular region or a particular area or a particular person for his divine providence for some reason that we don't know at this point. And then they can actually work legitimate signs and wonders in front of you that aren't just messing with your, your perception of things, but actually can manipulate the material world around you, like make things move, make things levitate, destroy things, burn things down, move things from one side of the room to the other. So when you see things like haunted houses and things like that, most of those now are just they're just gimmicks. There's like magnets and stuff everywhere, and they're just stupid. But like legitimate things that are like cursed, yeah, they actually have almost like a power of their own because they're under like supernatural dominion.
The city I'm from, Savannah, is a very old historical city, at least by American standards, and there's a big cottage industry of like ghost tours and stuff like that. Would you say people like shouldn't go on a ghost tour to a haunted house, even though a lot of it's probably like made up?
Like I don't know, that one's a bit tricky because if they're legitimately just they're kind of like a joke, like a jump scare sort of thing, like it's like going on a roller coaster. Like it's going to scare you, but it's not real. Um, some of them might be legitimate, and if it's like a legitimate thing, I'd say like don't go in there, and if you have to, like make sure you're in a state of grace. But yeah, I don't know. It's a bit tricky because I don't specifically know the individual account. I would say majority of them are just
If you'd like to ask a question, please request the microphone. Avid Wonder has had his hand up for a while, or at least the request for the mic. So, do you have a question for Imperator?
Yes, thank you. Very interesting discussion. My question was more focused on their capabilities. As we see what AI is capable of with enough information, as we see what advertising is capable of with enough information, and then you mentioning they have the ability to perceive everything in the physical world, it makes you wonder how much can they predict or anticipate what a person might be thinking. Typically, I think there's the belief in the Catholic Church that only God knows the future, but knowing that these creatures are very intelligent and with access to enough information, it seems like they could have some capabilities that approach God's as far as predictability, knowing someone's thoughts. And so I'd like to hear from Imperator, what are your thoughts on what their capabilities are with regards to predictiveness and knowing one's thoughts?
Yeah, no, that's actually an awesome question. Thank you. And I think I do talk about that in the thread. Basically, in a way, demons can almost, and even angels, because they operate the same way, but they can almost predict the future and everything that you're going to do before you do it, because we might not realize it, but we have neurological and physiological responses to certain stimuli. So if I'm angry, for example, we're only finding this stuff out, in the last 10, 15 years, certain parts of the brain light up. Like I'm sure you've seen those scans where they put those little pads on people's heads and like they show them images and certain parts of the brain light up. That has always existed. Just because we only figured that out now doesn't mean that hasn't always been there. So again, if you're an angel and you have access to the entirety of the material universe, and I'm sitting there and one part of my brain flashes, the part associated with anger, they know you're angry. You might not, you might think, how does that person know I'm angry? But they know you're angry because they can see that. They know your neurological and your physiological tics that are associated with certain things. Like, for example, when someone's in love and, or they're attracted to someone, their pupils dilate a little bit. They know that. So they can, okay, for example, I'm completely making this up. Let's say I'm at a bar and I'm at a work function or something, and some girl walks past me, and then my heart starts flickering a little bit. My heart rate increases and my pupils dilate a little bit. The demon that is attached to me would say he finds her attractive. Start slamming his imagination with thoughts of lust, and then like do the same thing with her so that they connect. So that way you can destroy this guy's marriage and get him hooked on, adultery or something like that. I know that's a very extreme example, but that's basically how it works. They pick up on your tics or your clues, and they just push that whatever vice is associated with it. And yeah,
I wonder if
Yeah,
it's
go on.
even more capable than that. I mean, if you think of what's going on with Neuralink, which is in its infancy, just by reading electrical signals, and if they're really that intelligent, there may be no privacy at all inside your own mind. I mean, what you're talking about is like physical things that you could observe, like the dilation of the pupils, the raising of a temperature or something like that. But if they have the type of capability that maybe Neuralink might bring, someday already, then it feels like you really have no private thoughts.
Yeah, because that's why it's important. There's one thing, they can't access your actual intellect. That's one thing that demons can never do. They can't access your intellect. They can't access your thoughts. You might telegraph your thoughts through like your physical responses, but they can't see what's in your mind. That's why, and again, this is a huge shout out to Catholic Frequency right now. That's why meditative and contemplative prayer is so important, because it almost like safeguards your mind. That's why the rosary is so important, because it puts you in a state where your mind becomes impenetrable. It's, again, I like films. It's kind of like, if any of you have ever seen that movie Inception, amazing film, love it. You know how the main character has the ability to like reinforce his mind with like soldiers? That's kind of like what you think about when you're thinking about like meditative and contemplative prayer. Your mind is becoming a fortress. It's impenetrable. So demons and even yourself, you're not swayed by external stimuli. That is also why it's important to guard your passions and to chastise yourself in the sense of doing mortifications and penances, because you're strengthening your dispositions, you're strengthening your spirit, you're strengthening your resolve, and you're conditioning yourself to be a fortress. And that's what, in doing so, demons can't affect you because they don't know what you're doing, because you're not like all over the place. You can't be influenced because you are a fortress. Okay. And that's why prayer is so important. And even you would find that when someone's in such a state of grace, even though you might have these nervous tics, even though you might have these neurological and electrochemical reactions to things, they can't pick it up because you're beyond them. They can't touch you. You know, that's why prayer is so important. And the same thing, you might look at, listen to this space and go like, oh my gosh, I'm doomed. These guys are going to absolutely wreck me. I can't do anything about this. We're just going to be destroyed by the demons and da da da. But man, you got to understand that the angels are even more powerful, and prayer is even more powerful. And if you're in a state of grace, you destroy all of these things. This, what I'm talking about right now, mainly applies to people who live in a state of habitual sin and vice. You have no protection. And that's why it's almost impossible, not impossible, but almost impossible, if you're like living as a pagan or like a non-religious person or like a non-Catholic, or you don't have any sacraments, bro, I don't know how you do it. Like, you are going to get absolutely destroyed. You have no sanctifying grace to defend you. You're almost like on a battlefield, running around with no weapons and no body armor. Like, yeah, technically, statistically speaking, you might survive, but I'm not taking those chances.
That's great.
AI thing, sorry, in regards to the whole AI thing, like, I personally think that there's nothing inherently wrong with AI. Like, it's a tool. It's like a calculator. It's like it's like the internet. It depends on how we use it. The problem that you will find is that people will start relying on AI too much, to the point where it becomes like a new idol. So it becomes like the ultimate psychic, if that makes sense. Because in the same way that demons are able to access the whole material universe, well, yeah, if you have internet systems that can link to every single account and every single person's phone and all their search history and everything they've ever said and all their conversations they've ever said on like WhatsApp and Signal and Facebook and X and whatever, yeah, you pretty much can have like a full scope understanding of who the person is. And then there's that whole idea of like the ghost in the machine, and it becomes like conscious and stuff. Again, I'm not an IT specialist. I don't know those things. I'm just talking now. It's not.
I want to pick up on something you said just a couple of minutes ago. If I understood what you said, they can see what we feel, but not what we think.
Correct. They can't access our intellect. They can access our imagination, because that's the material part of our intellect. So they can access like the previous things that you've seen, or project images into your mind, but they can't see your thoughts. Only God knows your thoughts, and only those to whom God gives permission, like active permission, to see your thoughts, which is like himself. And maybe like, if you believe in this stuff, which obviously I do, like a saint or an angel, demons can't get into your intellect. Again, that's why it's important to chastise your body and bring it into subjection, so that the intellect rules the passions and the appetites, if that makes sense.
We have just a couple minutes left. Into the mist. Quick question, if you want to ask one.
I sort of have a question, but a lot of thoughts.
Quick question. Quick questions only.
Questions only. Okay. Well, if the devil can't make any life, then can only make a mockery of life, then wouldn't that make AI a mockery of life with the logic of devil, like we could call it strategic foresight?
What's the deal with AI,
Pretty-
Imperator?
pretty deep. What do you mean by that?
So, like, a demon or an angels, they have a much higher knowledge base than we do. Like when they make a decision, they can see much further down the line than we do because they have a greater data set than we do. And an AI in a very similar way is, to me, like a mockery of life. And that doesn't mean that all AI is demonic, but if, a fallen angel has the powers of logical foresight, then wouldn't that transfer into an AI pretty powerfully?
Yeah, it's kind of like a parallel system. Yeah, it is in a way. And but like you said, it's just a tool. So it is a tricky one. It's like an emerging technology. You don't know where it's going to go. There's pros and cons. Again, like when it comes to AI, like why I'm excited about AI. There's a lot of books that I'm not like completely fluent in Latin. I want to like just convert them to use AI to convert it to English for me so I can read it. Like that's a good use of AI. If you're using AI to like take over the world, of course it's going to be a bad thing. But um, it's the only thing that I can say, because this isn't my specialty, and I don't pretend that it is. It just comes down to how you use it, I guess. It's like a gun. A gun can be used to rob someone, and that's horrible. A gun can be used by a woman to protect herself from a murderer. That's a good thing, to defend herself, self-defense. It's a tool. It depends on how you use it, I guess. But there is something kind of like sinister.
All right, we've been going for an hour. Imperator, I just want to ask you if you want to just give some final thoughts or just wrap up. Was there something you wanted to touch on that we didn't get to, or just sort of sum it all up for us about the origins of evil?
If you look at the Book of Genesis, the main, I guess you could say, uh, impetus or driving force of the devil, the way that it encourages people to reject God is this belief that you will be like God. Do what you want, do what thou wilt. That is the whole of the law. That's actually the maxim of Luciferianism, is this idea that you are your own God. You do whatever you want. Mine is right. There are no restrictions. It's very Machiavellian to the complete extent, and we live in a society, whether people recognize it or not, that is very demonic. It's very Luciferian because everyone is their own God. There is no morality. Everything is completely subjective, and you choose whatever you want to do. That is very evil, and that's completely against the order of nature and the order of creation, and it detracts from God's glory. What I will say is, and even in the modern age, in the ancient world with the idols and the statues and things like that, the promise is always, you do this for me, you eat the apple, you worship me, you give me this sacrifice of human life, and I will reward you with supernatural knowledge. I will reward you with greater technology. I'll reward you with X, Y, and Z. And um the the response from us should be, I should live according to my state in life and do what is right and obey the commandments of God. And yeah, you know what, you can get additional knowledge or secret knowledge or occult knowledge if you dabble in the occult and things like that, but that's not for you to know. There's certain things that human beings are not meant to know, and you need to accept that. Okay, and I accept that there's complete limitations to my knowledge, and I completely accept that, and I don't want to know certain things. So that's always the temptation that people have from the beginning of time with Adam and Eve to know good and evil, and to our modern age, in whatever way that is. I would say the most important thing, as I've said about 3 or 4 times, is you have to pray. You have to be in a state of grace. You have to live virtuously, because it strengthens you not only intellectually and physically, but also spiritually. Okay, and it creates a safeguard around you being in a state of grace. And the most important way that you can develop that, I guess, spiritual and intellectual and psychological and physical and holistic sort of well-being and strength is through prayer, by saying the rosary, by contemplative prayer, by sitting in front of the Blessed Sacrament and just having a conversation or praying to God in your mind by yourself, not saying anything out loud, and just having one-on-one time. That is the best and strongest thing you can possibly do, because that conditions your mind and your body to be impenetrable, but also surrounds you with, I guess, protection, to the point where even if things are around you, they're unable to penetrate your, I guess, the grace force field, I guess you could say. Please don't. I don't want anyone to get like listen to this space and freak out and think like we're all doomed in that. That's not what I'm trying to do. It's important to know this stuff, and you know, grace and prayer is the most important thing you can do. And you know, on our own, we have no hope, but we believe that through Christ we can do all things, and Jesus Christ is superior. Jesus Christ is powerful. Jesus Christ is God, and the sacraments and the saints will assist us as long as we pray and we aim to live virtuously. God will never allow anything to happen to us that we can't handle. You know, even Marcus Aurelius says that nothing happens to any man which he cannot endure. Nothing is going to happen to you that you can't handle. God's not going to afflict you with these things that are going to destroy you just because. Yes, he allows you to, he leaves us to our own devices, but if you're living a good life and you're living a wholesome and virtuous life, God will reward you with peace. And that's what Christ brings. He's the Prince of Peace. So if you just pray and you just strive to live a good and virtuous life, you will be safe. These things will not harm you. They will not affect you, but you will be keen and you'll see how other people's lives are falling apart around you, because whether they admit it or not, they're under the dominion of the demonic. Okay? And everyone who's not in a state of grace, who's living a vicious life in habitual sin, and again, I've said this before on X, everyone's like, oh, you know, we're going to be preppers and we're going to fight the Antichrist and we're going to do X, Y, and Z. We're going to go to war and we're going to do blah, blah, blah. It's like, bro, if you live in a state of mortal sin, you're already on the devil's side. Like, who are you fighting? Like, sort yourself out first, man. So that's the most important thing that people need to realize. Be in a state of grace, do the right thing, love your family, obey your parents, be a good husband or wife or whatever your state in life is. And that's how you glorify God. You don't have to be some champion going around fighting devils and things like that. Just do what you're supposed to do and pray.
You've been listening to the great Imperator, the biblical scholar from Australia. I love our spaces. Be sure to follow him. Help him. He won't be too long before he's at 50,000 followers. Be sure to subscribe to him to support his work. I love our spaces. I've come up with how I'm going to describe you, Imperator. My second favorite person on X, because this gives me plausible deniability with all my other friends, and I can tell them, oh no, you're really, you're number one. So that's what I'm going to be doing. So thank you so much. I thought we would end tonight with the St. Michael prayer, if that's okay. So we'll just say in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. And we have been talking tonight about evil, and we want to remind people that evil is nothing to be played with, not to dabble in it, not to dabble in the occult, to remember how powerful evil is, but we don't want to glorify evil or be afraid of it. Like Imperator said, we stay close to the virtues and the sacraments and God and angels, much more powerful. So we will... You want to say something?
You're absolutely right. Yeah, I just want to say that exactly. If you're in a state of grace and you're, the demons fear you, they're scared of you. The gates of Hades will not prevail against you. That's not a defensive claim. That's offense. Gates don't attack. You're meant to attack the gates of Hades. So if you're in a state of grace, they run away from you. Keep that in mind. So stay in a state of grace, be holy, pray, Catholic frequency. I'm just going to say it outright. You are my favorite account on X. Okay, it's all good. And after we say the St. Michael prayer in English, we're going to do it in Latin.
Okay. I'll do the English, you do the Latin. St. Michael the Archangel, defend us in battle. Be our protection against the wickedness and snares of the devil. May God rebuke him, we humbly pray. And do thou, O Prince of the heavenly host, by the power of God, cast into hell Satan and all the evil spirits who prowl about the world, seeking the ruin of souls. Amen.
Sancte Michael, Arcangele, defende-nos in proedium, contra nequitiam et insidias diaboli est praesidium. Imperatili Deus, plicis te precamur tuque princeps militiae celestis. Satana maliosque, spiritus malignos, qui ad perditionem animanum pervagantur in mundo, divini virtute in infernum detrude. Amen.